On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we are talking the 8th rotation spot for KU basketball. Jamari McDowell versus Marcus Adams versus Parker Braun. Who wins out? Why would they win out? We discuss all that on today's edition of the show.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Derek Johnson, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can hear me as well Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. on KLWN in Lawrence with Rock Chalk Sports Talk. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get any of your podcasts. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're talking a little rotation talk because you know, who's going to win that possible final spot between Jamari McDowell, Marcus Adams, and Parker Braun. We'll be discussing that and what it could mean to the future of the team and plenty more here. First, though, this episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started today. Okay, so we're going to be talking a little bit about the case that each of these three guys have. So if you look at KU basketball's roster right now, you look at the guys who could be, should be, and probably will be a part of the rotation. Jamari McDowell, Marcus Adams, and Parker Braun might be just outside of that, right? Where they might be battling for that one final spot. And there are different positions, but KU could play different ways to accommodate who that kind of last person would be. So you look at it right now, and K's DeJuan Harris, Arterio Morris, Elmarco Jackson, Kevin McCullough, KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, and Nick Timberlake. Those 7, you feel like are going to firmly be a part of the rotation. And maybe by the time we get to March, when we get to the NCAA tournament, the postseason, the Big 12 tournament, we are going to get to a point where just those 7 will be playing, right? We've seen a lot where the rotation has even narrowed to 7 guys. Like you think of the 2022 team that won the national title, they were pretty much doing a 7-man rotation. It was Remy and Mitch off the bench, and then occasionally, like I'm counting games where they're blowing out the opponent or something, but like occasionally it'd be like, okay, let's put Jalen Coleman Lands out there and just, try to hit a 3 or something like that, right? So it'd be like a 7.5-man rotation come the postseason. During the regular season, maybe it's closer to 8. During the non-conference portion of the season, maybe it's closer to 9, right? And when I say part of the rotation, I'm not just saying this playing 3 minutes. I'm saying like realistically every game they're playing that 8 to 10 minutes or something like that, right? Usually it's just like a 7-man rotation, maybe 8. I think there was the Morris twin year where they did go about 9 or 10 deep that year over the course of the regular season. But again, come the NCAA tournament, it again gets withered down. So it depends what timeline you're talking about here for exactly how deep that rotation is. But basically that means if you're going to be playing an 8-man rotation for, think about maybe the majority of the season, right? It might be 9 for non-conference play, but probably going to be 8 by the time you get to the Big 12 portion of the season for January, February, and maybe the very beginning of March. And so if you have those 7 that we already talked about, and you have one spot opening for the 8th, I guess you could say, if Zach Clements does well enough in offseason, I know the plan is for him to redshirt, but what if Zach Clements is just that good that it's like, we can't redshirt this guy. He's that good. We got to get him on the court. Then maybe he could be part of this discussion as well. But right now, that's not the plan, so I'm not going to talk about that right now. That means that you're left with one rotation spot open for the final 3 guys, right? And so it becomes interesting when you look at what each brings to the table. So with Parker Braun, you would be talking about if he's the 8th man in the rotation, he's playing the backup 5 minutes, and that means that KJ Adams is only playing, the 4 on the wing, so to speak. Now, I think part of Parker Braun being a part of the rotation isn't solely up to him. I think part of him being in the rotation is going to be dependent on, can KJ survive playing all his minutes at the 4? Because if he can survive playing all his minutes at the 4, then that could lead to an opening there of Parker Braun being there. But if there are some concerns about, the spacing and the offense with KJ at the 4, and he's not going to play all of his minutes at the 4, he's going to get some of his minutes at the 4, and you need to get him more minutes, so we need to get those minutes at his backup 5, then at that point, it is more of Parker Braun there. But there is a case if Parker Braun is that good that he doesn't just play the 5, that he can play the 4. We heard from Kevin McCullough. We heard from Bill Self talking about Parker Braun's athleticism. He can shoot the 3 a little bit in like the high 20%. So it's not like a shot that you're wanting to take repeatedly, but at least he has shown the ability to stretch the floor a bit, that you could even play Parker Braun at the 5 and have KJ at the 4, but it's really like Parker's at the 4 offensively and KJ's at the 5 offensively. So there is an avenue there if that's the way you want to play, and you can play Parker Braun at the 4 and 5, and it would give you another big man. Maybe that 8th man is Marcus Adams. I think Adams represents, of these 3 players with McDowell, Adams, and Braun, your maybe highest ceiling, your highest potential player in terms of what they could become. He also probably brings the most scoring output and just like skill in terms of scoring the basketball. You see him hit step back threes, drive into dunk, drive in and make strong layups, jab, step around. Like he's a very athletic scorer, and I think has the highest potential of all these 3 players in terms of being like, Marcus Adams, by the time he's a junior, for instance, you could see him being that all Big 12 level player, that KU leader that's putting up 16, 17 points per game, right? You can see that happening in his career. But is that going to be a fit right away, right? Like, if you're the 8th man on a team, is it going to come down to you need to play a specific role? Or is it going down to we just need scoring punch off the bench, right? Like it could be dependent on what exact role KU was looking for. But if the scoring talent is that undeniable, it's hard to keep that guy off the court. On the flip side, if your biggest thing is your scoring and you're an 8th man and somebody else is doing other little things well, because if you're an 8th man, you're not going to be the primary option when you're on the court. Like think back to Christian Braun. Christian Braun was a non-top 100 recruit. And it's not just the development Christian Braun had. Christian Braun was a rotation player on a team that was the number 1 team in the country as a true freshman. Like he was, I don't know, 6th, 7th man on that team, right? And the reason why, it wasn't because he was going to come out and be your best scorer off the bench or this or that. It's because he fit a certain role. He was going to hustle. He was going to play hard. He was going to round. He was going to defend. And he was going to shoot threes, right? Like he fit a certain role. And so you found minutes for him. Is Marcus Adams going to do those little things well, or is he just going to be an overall player where it might be more about, maybe there's a better fit for being the 8th man? But in terms of just the most talent, like I think you would argue that he's the guy. And then you have Jamari McDowell, who maybe he fits more into those role-specific traits, right? To where if you told me Marcus Adams and Jamari McDowell are both at Kansas for 3 years, right? Or over the next 3 years, right? And they both stick around school. Who ends up winning more All Big 12 awards? Who ends up averaging more points per game for their career? Who has the better chance to get their jersey in the rafters or something? You probably go like Marcus Adams, right? But who has a better chance to impact this team? Who has a better chance to be a good role player right away? It might be Jamari McDowell. You're talking about good 3-point shooter, which I think Marcus Adams is too. So that'd be a check for both those. I think McDowell, though, you really believe in what the defense could be on that end of the floor. And a versatile wing, right? This is kind of the same notion of Christian Braun, what I mentioned. He's going to play hard. He's going to play defense, hit threes. Like there's usually roles for those guys and especially in role-playing opportunities. And I think we got a chance to talk to Jamari McDowell at a media availability, and you don't see a lot of freshmen who, when they get asked about their, impact court, how important defense is and how much they do value it. Like sometimes you get that as lip service, like, oh yeah, I got to defend. But like he went into it. I want to play this clip for you.
If you play basketball, man, you got to play defense. Like it's not even a debate, you know what I'm saying? So if you play defense, you can play in the game. You can make an impact regardless if you're scoring or not. So that's really just what I'm focusing on this year.
And when you say that's what you want to focus on, like what kind of preparation goes into that to making sure that's like a strong aspect?
A lot of work and mostly on-court work, just slides and really just getting in shape. Defense is really effort. You give effort, you'll be able to play defense nonstop.
For folks that haven't been able to watch you play full games yet, just how would you kind of describe your overall game?
Once again, definitely defensive minded, but of course I can shoot. I can play man, I can get people open. Do a little bit of everything. Just the all-around basketball player.
On the defense there from Jamari McDowell, and that's what can get you on the court, especially if you're a good 3-and-D wing defender. KU doesn't really have a ton of true small forwards on the roster, which I think Marcus Adams could play there as well. So you kind of get a good competition between all these 3 guys. Let's get to my pick and exactly how this could impact KU's level of play and how exactly they're playing coming up in just a second. First, though, this episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. You can bet on any of the MLB action with futures. You can bet on their Dinger Tuesday opportunities on Tuesdays where you bet on somebody to hit a home run and get all sorts of bonus bets. Read all about it. They have all these awesome promos and boosts that they're giving out to baseball. So don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission. Okay, so on who wins that possible rotation spot. I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, I probably would have said Marcus Adams. I would have said the talent and the three-point shooting. Then about a week or two ago, after hearing all that stuff from Jamari McDowell and hearing how he was doing, I probably would have said Jamari McDowell. But now I'm kind of back to Marcus Adams. I got to see both as part of a scrimmage, and I was really impressed with the skill level of Marcus Adams. But in all honesty, I think the easy answer here is whoever is deemed to be a better three-point shooter, to which I don't really know which of those two it is. Marcus Adams, I think, maybe has more off the dribble three-point shooting ability, but I don't know how much you're going to be asking him to do that specifically in year one. Jamari McDowell, I don't know, who's the better set shooter? Who's the better spot-up shooter of the two from three-point range? Because that could come down to it with a KU team that's going to need that three-point shooting. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe it comes down to more than that, where if, even if Marcus Adams is a slightly better three-point shooter, but if Jamari McDowell is a better defender, then he gets on the court instead. And I know that's more of those two guys as opposed to Parker Braun. It still could be Parker Braun. But I think it's very interesting. So right now, my guess would probably be, Marcus Adams, but I'm not firm in that at all. I don't feel great about that. I do think what's very, very impact it'll have on how they play, depending which one it is. If it is Jamari McDowell, you are looking at playing a little bit smaller. And Jamari McDowell is more of a shooting guard, small forward type, 6'4", 6'5", something like that. To where if you're playing Jamari McDowell, he's obviously going to be playing the 3 at that point because of all the little guards that you have. And that basically means playing more with those true small forwards. And maybe it means playing Kevin McCullough at the 4. It could even be playing KJ Adams at the 4, right? It's the differences, though, to where if the other guys play. If Marcus Adams ends up being that 8th man, if Marcus Adams is playing more of that role on the team, then you're talking about, him playing probably the small ball 4, I think is where he profiles at least long-term for KU. Now, he could play in at the small forward, but that would mean if he's playing a good chunk of his minutes, if he's playing 10, 15 minutes per game as the 8th man in the rotation, as 4, does that mean KJ Adams is therefore playing backup 5 minutes and playing some at the 4? Is Kevin McCullough not playing any 4 at that point in time? Because most of, if not all of your 4 minutes have been divvied up now between, KJ Adams and Marcus Adams at that point. So you're playing more with Kevin at the 3. And what does that do to the little guards with Timberlake, Morris, and Elmarco Jackson? Does that create more of a crunch at the positions that they were going to be playing? How many minutes that those guys could specifically get out on the court? And then with Parker Braun, if you decide to play him, that obviously impacts a lot of how you would want to play. Because if he's playing at the backup 5, that means KJ Adams has no 5 minutes. He's getting all his minutes at 4. And that means there's less minutes at the 4 to go around for, Kevin McCullough or Marcus Adams, I guess. And then you're talking about, again, eating into the minutes of the guys at the 1 and 2. And there is enough flexibility here that, right, what if Parker Braun even becomes an 8th man where he's playing some minutes at the 4 and some minutes at the 5, right? And then you have even less minutes to give out at the 4. And now there's more of a roster crunch on kind of the guys at the guard positions. Whereas I think with, McDowell specifically, it makes you play more in how you feel like your starting lineup is going to be right now. So I'll be very interested to see how this exactly does affect KU in their style of play. And, at the end of the day, it's not going to be that different in terms of what key players they're going to and what they're trying to accomplish out there. But the style of play in terms of it being this many guards versus this many forwards versus having this many big men, right? Are you going to play 2 bigs technically with Parker Braun? that's the type of effect it has, which is going to slightly shift and stylistically change KU basketball. So I think that's kind of very interesting to profile. All right, we're going to finish things up here with how much specifically, because in the case of Parker Braun, whether he wins that spot or doesn't, this is last year of college basketball. He's a grad transfer. This will be his final year of collegiate eligibility. But with Jamari McDowell and Marcus Adams, it's not just about who's going to win that 8th rotation spot for this year, who's going to be a part of the rotation for this year's team. It's about which of those guys can set themselves up as being part of the rotation this year to maybe further that opportunity come 2024 to 2025 season when more players could depart. And maybe that competition this year determines who's going to be the starter next year, right? Like, you don't know how it's going to all work out. So we'll discuss that next with Locked On Jayhawks. Okay, finishing things up with Locked On Jayhawks, how much will Jamari McDowell versus Marcus Adams this year in the rotation matter long-term? Of course, one player could make a big jump over next offseason and, surpass that other player. But typically we see the guy that builds up trust right away is the guy that tends to continue to earn that trust moving forward. And you kind of wonder what will happen to the winner and loser of that competition. So you fast forward another year to 2024 to 2025, Kevin McCullough gone, Parker Braun gone, and then you just have a bunch of decisions like, would Hunter Dickinson be back or not? Would Arterio Morris or Marco Jackson go pro, right? You have all these conversations. But theoretically, there could be, what if it's down to like there's one starting spot open by the time they're done making other additions and the returning players, to where whoever wins the rotation battle this year could be that 5th starter, next year too, right? So there could be long-term repercussions of who wins the rotation battle just this very summer and how important that is going to be. And then you add to it where it's like, does the loser of the competition end up transferring? Does the loser of that competition go, I didn't get part of the rotation this year and now I'm behind this guy to begin with next year? Do they end up transferring? It's always a possibility. And I'm not trying to say that, these guys aren't long for KU or they don't want to be here. Of course they want to be here. Of course they want to be long for KU. But we've seen enough of it with the transfer portal, with KU players leaving and, that sort of thing, to where you never rule that type of stuff out. That obviously becomes a real discussion. And I think beyond that, for Adams, it's a key opportunity for the following year, especially because like the following year after 2024 to 25. So you're talking 2025 to 2026, which I know feels like so long from that. But like if KJ is back for a senior season playing the 4, what would that mean for Marcus Adams both next year and the year after, in terms of if he gains trust, could he play at the 3 with KJ at the 4? And then the year after KJ's gone, you profile to being the starting 4, right? So it has a very clear long-term path that you can kind of go on there. But if McDowell earns the rotation trust this year, then he's kind of the 3 with that position opening up with Kevin McCullough gone and Nick Timberlake gone, right? Like both your 3 options are gone. And immediately you could be like, okay, we're sliding him in. And then if you're Marcus Adams, you're going, well, now I'm behind Jamari McDowell and I'm behind KJ Adams. And yeah, I could be the starter the year after, but right, like you have to worry about kind of climbing up the ladder that way. So it does have that kind of long-term impact. And in the case of both players, I think both are going to be good long-term players for KU if they end up sticking around, but you never know how that's really going. And I'll be honest, like I'm fully in on both guys being key KU players, like down the road. Like I said, I could see Marcus Adams being an all Big 12 player in year 2 or year 3. I could see Jamari McDowell kind of being that really good next solid role player that continues to develop and becomes a role player plus, that maybe even he becomes a all Big 12 level player down the road. But you just never know with the portal. And certainly you would think one is going to be set up better than the other based on what they do this offseason, based on what they do in the season, and setting themselves up to grab that 8th rotation spot could set that person up to be a future KU star, could set that person up to be a future KU all Big 12 player, could set that player up to be a future NBA draft pick. Whereas the loser of the job, you never know where they're going to end up, right? So I mean, there still is an ideal world and opportunity where both end up being both of those things, right? But because you never really know with the craziness of college basketball rosters anymore, you really get the inside track to the person who ends up winning that rotational battle. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back throughout the week talking some more KU basketball, talking a little KU football as well. You can find us wherever you get any of your podcasts with Locked On Jayhawks You can also subscribe to the show on our YouTube page. Have a good rest of your day. See you next time.